8,850 meters, the mountain has stirred the imagination and courage of man for centuries. Hundreds have died trying to climb to its summit, and now a city slicker with a borrowed sleeping bag but a lot of heart is about to attempt to trek to its third base camp. This is the Everest Podcast.
And welcome to episode 22 of the Everest Podcast. My name is Erick, and I am currently in Shigatse in Tibet. The journey continues on, as those of you who have been listening in know. Finished up my Everest trek just a couple of days ago now, but am continuing onwards from Everest to Lhasa, so heading north from the Everest Valley, from the Himalayas, deeper into Tibet. And today we drove from Shigar to Shigatse, two different towns, even though they sound the same. The word of the day, before I forget, is bad karaoke. Bad karaoke. And we'll see why that's the word of the day shortly. But like always, just want to give you a quick highlight of the day. And this will be pretty short because most of the day was spent on the road. We actually took off really early in the morning from Shigar, as the drive from Shigar to Shigatse is about 8 to 9 hours. The road is pretty much unpaved, ridiculously bumpy. It takes you through mud holes and across rivers, and you have to basically ford these streams with your Jeep, and the road conditions are terrible and dusty and disgusting. So it takes a long time to get there. And so we basically headed out bright and early in the morning, stopped by for lunch in this little town called Lhotse, and the food was okay. It was pretty decent, nothing to write home about per se. In fact, the only two things that were really eventful along the way, one of them was actually pretty dramatic. We had just finished lunch, and we were about 2 hours away from Shigatse, and we had just driven from unpaved bumpy road back onto paved road. So we were feeling good, we were getting close, the home stretch was there, and then all of a sudden we hear this really loud explosion, this pop from the back of our car, and turns out we got a flat. The back right tire of our Jeep just completely blew out. No idea why. It's probably just the heat and the repeated pounding the tires were getting over the rocky terrain, and it finally just gave out, ironically, on the paved road. But our Jeep driver and our guide were like a pit crew. In less than 20 minutes, they had swapped the tire out with the spare and had us back up and running. So we lost really very little time, but it was pretty dramatic at the time when it happened. And the other dramatic moment was earlier that day when we came up to this big traffic jam in the middle of nowhere, and it turned out that a small car had gotten stuck in this big mud hole right in the middle of the road, and there was no way for anyone to get around. And it took a truck that was also there to attach a cable and basically pull the car out of the mud hole. So that took a little while for us to wait for to free up the car, but eventually that came out and we were able to continue on our way. Other than those two little events, nothing really major. We arrived in Shigatse towards the early evening. Shigatse is at 12,870 feet, so we're still sort of hovering at relatively high altitudes, nothing at all compared to Everest, obviously, but we dropped only about 500 feet from Shigar to Shigatse, and we will be hovering around in the sort of plus 12,000 feet range for the next almost week, as Lhasa is also plus 12,000. But at this point, we are super acclimatized. We feel like Supermen at this altitude, and nothing can get us down. So it's really not really even an issue now. Shigatse is an interesting town. For those of you who are coming out to visit Tibet, you should definitely include Shigatse in your itinerary. It's the second largest city in Tibet, most noted for a really, really beautiful monastery. And I'm going to completely butcher the name of the monastery, but it's Tashilunpo Monastery. Anyway, it's the only big monastery in Shigatse, but it's also the winter palace of the Panchen Lama. And more importantly, it's one of the best preserved monasteries in all of Tibet, as it was largely spared during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, when the Chinese government came out and pretty much destroyed much of the ancient Buddhist temples in Tibet, along with a lot of the artifacts, the statues, the documents, the papers that were in the monasteries as well. It's a really sad event. The reason why the Shigatse monastery was relatively well preserved and untouched was because the 10th Panchen Lama at the time was in Beijing and pretty good friends with the Chinese government. And as a result, the government didn't really touch the monastery, as it was the home of the Panchen Lama. So we benefit, we as in us tourists now who venture to Shigatse, as there are beautiful buildings and wonderful architecture to take in. Also, the largest, or one of the largest, future Buddhas in the world. It's got to be, I think, like 3 or 4 stories tall. It's sitting in the lotus position, and it's completely covered in copper and gold plated, as well as studded with these precious jewels, so precious stones and jewels. So it's this huge, unbelievably huge Buddha, and pretty cool to know that it's like, one of the largest in the world. I think it's the largest, I'm not quite sure. But really cool site there. Also, the monastery is also home to the remains of the past few Panchen Lamas, including the 10th Panchen Lama and the 9th Panchen Lama. So pretty cool rooms that have been dedicated to their remains as well. And there are monks everywhere tending to the rooms as well as to the overall monastery, and maintaining the yak butter candles and the offerings and all that. So a really great site. One of the coolest things that we saw there as well was there's this ritualistic debate that the monks will do, I think, every afternoon. And they basically just gather in this open courtyard in the monastery, and they just start debating each other. I don't know about what. I think it's about philosophy and religion, but I don't know. It could be about who's the better boy band. I'm not quite sure. It's in Tibetan. So I didn't understand a single word they were saying. But it's really cool because they get very animated, and they keep slapping their hands together. And so you can actually hear these guys from, it feels like a mile away just by the slapping of the hands. And as you get closer, it's like a flock of geese, just this loud, constant noise of chatter and debate and voices. And as you get even closer, you can start picking out the different conversations, obviously in a different language. But it's really cool to see all these young monks going at it in this sort of debate-like fashion. So that was sort of the Shigatse experience. Beyond that, what did we do? The last interesting piece of Shigatse. The evening when we arrived in Shigatse, we decided to go hit a nightclub, and this was kind of a wreck. It turned out to be 2 of the worst hours of my entire trek, and definitely 2 hours of my life that I'll never, ever, ever get back again. Upon the suggestion of our guide, we hit this quote-unquote nightclub where supposedly you can go and watch some traditional Tibetan dance for the first 2 hours from 10 to midnight, and then afterwards it turns into more of like a traditional club, as they say in the States, or disco, as they say everywhere else in the world. Unfortunately, this was not the case. It turned out to be just this really painful session, this sort of unending session of horrible karaoke and horrible Chinese music videos in this giant sort of function hall that was only like a tenth filled, dark, smoky, and smelly. It was just horrible. About an hour late, the traditional Tibetan dance did come on. It was kind of a mess. I would definitely not recommend this experience to anyone. Save yourself the hassle. Even go to sleep instead. You'll thank me later for not having wasted 2 hours of your life. But after about 2.5 hours of this, we finally decided that we had to leave, and so we took off and went back home and called it a night. And that was pretty much it for that day. The word of the day again is what was the word of the day? It was bad karaoke. So now you know why. It was this just horrible nightclub experience that everyone should try to avoid at all costs if they can in Shigatse. And other than that, just a preview for tomorrow. We will be heading from Shigatse to Gyantse and continuing on our journey towards Lhasa. So thanks again for listening in to the Everest podcast, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Take care.
For more information on Erick's Everest trek, as well as photos from his trip, please visit his website at www.everestpodcast.com.